Hello, everyone. This is Dorie Clark, and we're here with our weekly interview show for Newsweek Better. Our guest this week is Dr. Guy Winch. He is the author of the book, How to Fix a Broken Heart, as well as numerous other books. He has done a variety of popular TED Talks, and he's also the co-host of the Geotherapist Podcast. Guy, it's so wonderful to have you here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. And we'd like to welcome all of you who are tuning in from around the world. If you're joining us, right into the chat box, let us know who you are and where you're tuning in from. And also any questions that you have for Guy about how to fix your life, basically, because this is a guy who has insights about many things. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about, Guy, I know, consult and speak around the world. One of the places that you actually have spoken for in the past is the British government, including 10 Downing Street. This is a stressful day right now at 10 Downing. Boris Johnson, of course, has just announced that he is stepping down. You have done a lot of work in terms of understanding workplace stress and just all of the emotions going along with it. If you were advising Boris Johnson literally this minute, or anyone who is in the position where they have lost their job or essentially been sort of forced out unwillingly, what would be your advice for a person in that situation?
I would have multiple prongs of advice. The first one would be, when something like that happens, you do need to do the due diligence. You need to look at what happened, look at your responsibility, look at your mistakes, look at what you could have done differently or better. There's always stuff to learn when something goes wrong, and too many people skip over that because it's unpleasant. The key to doing that well is doing it without a wagging finger in your own face. In other words, you can note a mistake, you can take responsibility for something without adding any kind of self-critical, like, oh, I'm such an idiot, or why did I do that? Just learn from it. And then you need to pivot. And I always believe in my office when I see patients, I believe in the two-prong approach of, like, give them the tissue box when they're upset. But after that, let's pivot to now what? Now what do we do? So that there's two-prong, like, learn what you can, do the due diligence, but then you do have to look forward about what's next.
That makes a lot of sense. We're here with Guy Winch. He is a podcast host, co-host of the Geotherapist Podcast, and an author. You can learn more about him and his great work at his website, guywinch.com. And we're talking about how to guard against workplace stress and burnout. Now, Guy, one of the more interesting pieces of research that you've done, and you've given some very popular talks about this, after the pandemic, we're all trying to understand and unpack workplace stress. But one of the points that you make is that we may have it a little bit wrong, that it's not necessarily work or being at work per se that is causing the stress and burnout, but we maybe need to twist our understanding of this a little bit. Can you elaborate and explain what's really going on?
Yeah, I'll just start with this. We have a finite amount of intellectual resources, attentional resources. When we're really focused on doing our work, when we're in the office or at home, when we're actually working, we don't have enough bandwidth left over to ask ourselves if we're stressed, or to even to experience much stress. Often the time flies by and we don't pay attention. It turns out that most of the work stress we experience it outside of work, when we're commuting to work, when we're having dinner in the evening and checked out, worrying about something that happened, when we're awake at 3 a.m. in the morning because we're worried about this project or upset about something. And we experience it in the form of rumination. Rumination are these unproductive kinds of thoughts in which we just spin like a hamster in an emotional wheel, where we're just thinking of the upsetting thing. An example is, I have so much work to do. So many people spend many hours muttering, thinking about how much work they have to do, worrying, but unproductively. And that activates our stress response physically, and it actually doesn't solve anything, because we're not thinking creatively, we're not problem solving, we're not trying to figure something out, we're just brooding and dwelling. And so it turns out we do that for many, many hours a week, and that is a chunk of work stress that we do have control over, that we can minimize if we catch it.
That's a great point. It's sort of like the saying, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. And in this case, it may not be the work, it's the rumination about the work.
Correct. That's a great analogy. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The crime can take a minute. The cover up, the ruminating about it can go on for days and weeks and hours. And that's what's doing the damage. That's what's burning us out a lot of the time.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I love that. And we want to say hi to some of the great folks who are tuning in from around the world to join us. If you're enjoying this conversation, please hit the like button and hit the share button so that your friends and colleagues can benefit from Guy's insights. We wanted to say hi. We have a LinkedIn friend joining us from California. Molly is here from Rwanda. Rita Marie is here from Ireland. Hetty in Philadelphia. April from Jefferson City, Missouri. Monica's in Washington. Allison is in Dallas. Domingo is from Bogota. Diana's from South Carolina. Milton is here from Sao Paulo. Harsha is here from London, hanging out with Boris right there. Henry is in Oakland. Roger is from Berlin. We have Ashley here. We have Erica from Annapolis and many more. We're so glad to have all of you. Please type your questions for the psychologist Guy Winch into the chat box. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. Now, Guy, one of the things that I really am most interested in, I love your breadth of work in general, but you wrote a book a few years ago. It's called How to Fix a Broken Heart. And I think this is particularly near and dear to me because one of the topics that you talk about in the book is about, I guess, what we could call misunderstood heartbreaking. That, everybody knows that if a relative dies, a human relative, that you are sad, or that if you get a divorce, that's terrible. But there are underappreciated kinds of heartbreak, like a breakup with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or the death of a pet. And I know for me, as someone who was super, super messed up for a long time when my cat died, I appreciate you shining on that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Why so misunderstood and what should be about it?
So these are two forms of disenfranchised grief, we call it. In other words, when people have a romantic breakup at any age, and truly at any age, you can be 18, it can be 80. And when people lose a beloved pet, they go through real grief responses. They actually respond much like other people do when they lose a first degree relative, in all the drama, the trauma, and the non-functionality of it. Yet these are unsanctioned. Very few people are going to go to work and say to their boss, I need a week off, my cat died. And yet the grief they might experience might be profound. They're going to spend the week, in the bathroom claiming they have allergies because their eyes are so puffy. And the same thing with romantic heartbreak. If you're 20 and you go in and you say, I just had a breakup, I can't come in for a few days, that's one thing, but you're not going to do it at 50. And even if you have a very understanding boss, it's going to be limited, but the grief can be quite extended. And because of that, there's so little information out there for people about the fact that when we're trying to recover from these kinds of experiences, it is an active process. There are actually things we should do to recover, and there are quite a few things we should not do if we want to recover. And yet people get those very much reversed. They don't know, so they do all the bad things that they shouldn't be doing, and they don't do the things that they really need to do to move forward. And so I wrote that book because I wanted to alert people, A, to take these things very seriously because they impact us very, very dramatically. And secondly, to give people tools so they have some kind of coping so that the grief is less extended and the pain can be soothed somewhat.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you very much. We're here with Guy Winch. He's the author of How to Fix a Broken Heart. And we want to say hi to some of the amazing folks who are joining us. Kiana's joining us from Lawrenceville, Georgia. We have Omar from Guinea. We have Chiamba joining us. Max is from France. Cynthia from LA. We have Simona from the Netherlands. Serena's here. We have a LinkedIn friend from Covington, Georgia. Jeanette is in Chile. Celeste is in South Africa. Farhad is in Kentucky. We have a LinkedIn friend from Toronto. Emmanuel from Nigeria.
That's a lot of people from all over the world. That's quite amazing. And I think Dorie's a bit frozen, but she'll be back in a second. But it's so great that so many people from all over are joining the show.
I appreciate that, Guy. Thank you very much. Yes, Guy and I today both are in somewhat straitened Wi-Fi circumstances, so we appreciate your patience with this, but we're going to have an amazing conversation nonetheless. So our friend Harsha from London had a great question. He is very familiar with your work. He's a fan, and he wants to know, Guy, he says, in a previous TED Talk, you have talked about how failure can distort our perceptions and mislead us. What are the
Okay, I'm going to complete that question because until Dorie gets back, but she will because we've been having these issues, as I said. So yeah, the thing about failure is that it predisposes us to really think that we can't do something. It makes us feel. I'm answering the question, even though I didn't hear the end of it. If you do want to complete it, because I wasn't going in a specific direction, but I'm saying that the thing what happens when we fail is it starts to make us believe, and actually quite profoundly, that we can't do something. And often we will get discouraged. People sometimes fail at something when they're just starting out in a certain direction and go, oh, that's not for me. They forget they have a learning curve. They forget that they can do things differently. So if we want to recover from failure, we have to become what I call failure detectives. Again, we have to go back to the scene of the crime and look at what we can do differently, not what we did bad and why we were stupid and why we should have known, only what can we improve. The antidote to the helplessness that failure makes us feel is to assert a feeling of control. And you can get a feeling of control as soon as you identify, this I can do differently, this I can do in this way, this I can improve. And that should be the approach to failure. It's giving you a bit of a menu of where you might have some blind spots. And once you know what they are, you can adjust for them. And then you can avoid other similar kinds of mistakes in the future.
Very wise. Thank you for the question, Harsha. And Guy, thank you very much. If you want to learn more about Guy Winch and his great insights, go to guywinch.com. That is where you can learn more. And his most recent book is How to Fix a Broken Heart. So, Guy, we are talking today about workplace stress and burnout. And a question came in from a LinkedIn user that was intrigued with what you were saying earlier about the fact that ruminating about work is often the biggest problem. And they want to know, how can we mentally disconnect? Literally, what can we do? The person says, my husband and I tend to talk about work during dinner to vent, but we still go to, perhaps not surprisingly, we go to bed thinking about work. This seems like maybe not the optimal scenario. What should they be doing instead?
I recommend guardrails. You need to know, and by you, I mean you, your partner, your family, whoever you're with, and especially your own mind, need to know when the workday ends. Your job, and it is a job at the end of the workday, is to recover and to recharge. And you can't do that if you're thinking about work, because you can even have a 10-minute conversation at 9 o'clock about work. That will stay with you for a couple of hours, and then you can't go to bed. So I believe you should decide on a time. It can be 7, it can be 8, whatever it could be, 6, 9, whatever. Decide on it. And from that time on, there is no discussion about work. You don't check emails, or if you must, do that once for 10 minutes at some point, not continually throughout the night. And remind yourselves, your job now is to relax, to recover, to recharge. And that is a job. I often say to people, put in your schedule, not blank space after you finish work. Recover, recharge. Remind yourselves that is your job. And therefore, if you know that, you'll be much less inclined to, let's talk about that thing that activates us, stresses us out, makes us upset, switches us on, when our goal right now is to switch off.
I love that. That's great. And there's a quick follow-up, Guy, from Maureen. She wants to know, what are some quick things you can do to put the brakes on rumination when it's already happening? If you feel like, oh gosh, I'm in this cycle now, how can I get out of it? What can you do in the moment?
Well, there's several techniques you can use, but here's a quick and simple one. The research shows that 2 to 3 minutes of a distraction that requires concentration is enough to break the urge to ruminate in that moment. So if you're going to just sit there and watch TV, your mind is going to go to that. It's got to be something quite active, like a crossword puzzle, or Wordle is my new thing, but it's only good for 1 rumination a day. But nonetheless, but something that actually requires concentrations for 2 or 3 minutes is a little bit of a reset, like the Etch-a-Sketch in your head kind of goes like this and clears it out. You might need to do that again 15 minutes later if something reminds you of work, if you're looking at your phone, or if your partner starts talking about work, you might need to do it again. But when you're ruminating, the urge to do it is really strong, and we typically feel like we're doing something important because your mind's saying to you, oh, you need to think this through, except you're not thinking it through. You're just replaying it and replaying it and replaying it. Another way we do that is we have fantasy conversations with people. We literally are crafting arguments we're going to have with our boss that we're never really going to have. And so that's rumination. It's not useful. It doesn't help you. So a 2 to 3 minute distraction can be enough to get your attention away, and then redirect the attention where you want it to go, toward the recovery, toward the recharge, toward a much more pleasant conversation, perhaps with a real person, rather than the imaginary one that you're never going to have.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I think so many of us have these imaginary conversations, which are not terribly productive. So thank you for that. In the of talking about how we can actually on from things, we have a rather poignant question from our friend Annette in Southern California. Annette says that about a week and a half ago, her husband was suddenly in a life-threatening situation and survived. And she wants your advice, Guy, about how do you process a near miss? She says, I'm still stunned by the situation. Suggestions about how to observe what happened and move on. If someone just is feeling freaked out, understandably, about something like that, what should you begin to do?
So first of all, understand that that is an incredibly natural reaction to have when you, out of the blue, are suddenly confronted with a worry of, uh-oh, I might lose someone or something drastic might change in my life. It's shocking, it's dramatic. Even if it turns out to be okay, or especially, hopefully, if that's the case, you're still left with the fact that your whole foundation of security and trust and safety just got severely dislodged. But one thing you can do, I always believe you should try and benefit from difficult life experiences as much as you can. In this case, what does that say to her about being able to appreciate what she does have? Maybe she starts a gratitude journal to talk, to really note the things that she's really grateful for. Maybe now every day is a blessing for a while. Maybe she can really start to appreciate things. Like after the pandemic, after the shutdowns really, and after the lockdowns, a lot of people were appreciating stuff we took for granted for so many years, like being able to meet friends at a restaurant or go to a show or take walks or whatever it was. This is one of those opportunities where one of the ways to move forward from it is to look at what did it teach you to appreciate, what can it allow you to do, or even perhaps what changes might you want to make in your life if that scare happened. What can it teach you? What maybe might you want to tweak because you realize certain things are more valuable? And so there's an opportunity there to do some thinking. She should do it with her partner since this happened to him. But you might want to make some decisions from that, change some habits from that, and trying to make appreciation and gratitude a more central part of your day-to-day.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you very much. We're here with the weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. I'm Dorie Clark, and we're here every Thursday at 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern, 5 o'clock in London. Our guest this week is Guy Winch, who is the co-host of the Geotherapist Podcast. He's the author of numerous books, including his latest, How to Fix a Broken Heart. And we want to say hi to our great friends tuning in from around the world. Ginny's from Missouri. Sapita's here from Birmingham. I'm not sure if that's Alabama or UK, but either one, we welcome you. Susan's here from Arizona, and many more. When I got unceremoniously cut off a few minutes ago, the previous chat got erased. So I apologize if I'm not saying hi to the many of you who are joining us live. We're so happy that you are here.
And I'm going to assume Dorie will be back any moment. I think if she's frozen for me, she's frozen for you. She does tend to come back quite quickly. I do want to say one thing about the Geotherapist podcast. It's live therapy sessions. And so that's why we do it, because we want to democratize therapy, and you can actually hear how two therapists work with somebody live. And there's a lot of takeaways that can apply to your own life. A plug while you're away.
That is exactly how you should use the time when I'm away. Exactly. Just off chillaxing with my internet connection. So thank you, Guy. That's wonderful. So Susan had a question about what she calls the positive side of rumination. She says, my brain or creativity, often appears in those.
Okay, so I'm going to actually, again, I'm going to answer the question before I actually heard it, because I think I can. If you're thinking about work in creative or problem-solving ways, if you're excited about a project and you're home and you're getting ideas about it, that's not rumination. That's not considered rumination. That's considered adaptive and healthy forms of thinking or self-reflection. What qualifies as rumination is you're thinking about, by definition, upsetting, stressful, distressing things. And you're ruminating because it activates a stress response. You're feeling it here, you're feeling it here, you're feeling it here. It's not pleasant. You're feeling troubled, you're feeling beladen. If you're thinking in a creative way, you're getting creative ideas, then that is by definition productive forms and adaptive forms of thinking. So that's actually not classified as rumination. And the creativity is what shifts it to a different category. So you're all good.
Love that, Guy. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your patience. I'm going to have a word with Mr. Hilton after after all this is over. Oh well, I even sprung for the high speed. Oh well, what can we
Well,
do
you do
here?
come back quickly, Dorie. I'll give you that. So, there's high
They, you
speed
know,
for you.
they knock me down, but they can't keep me down, Guy.
There you go.
That's my emotional resilience. So a question that I have, one of the interesting things that you have done in your varied past, in addition, I mean, we're not even gonna have time to go here. I know you're a filmmaker. I know you do stand-up comedy, but also in the psychology front, you wrote a book about a decade ago about how to complain more effectively. This is a fascinating topic. I'm sure many of us, especially post-pandemic, feel like there's a lot to complain about. If one were to want to complain, what are your top tips for how to do a better job of it?
Well, that was my first book. It was called The Squeaky Wheel. It was about our psychology of complaining. And the premise of it was that psychology is quite broken because in this day and age, the statistics are, if we look at, say, the customer service domain, that 95% of people, when they have a real complaint about a product or a service, won't voice it to the company because they'll feel that doing that will require too much effort and too much aggravation. Instead, they will voice it on average to 12 to 16 friends. And each time they do, it's like with the rumination, they get upset, they get aggravated. And so all the time that they're not spending on a 10-minute email to a customer or a phone call, they're actually spending in a useless way. And our psychology of complaining is broken in that way. We rarely think through what we want to achieve when we complain. We rarely realize how complaining to the ether or to friends who can't do anything about the problem is actually making us feel helpless and demoralized because we feel like we actually can't be empowered in the world. We can't affect change. We can just vent about our, oh, poor me. It's also very common that when we have a complaint or a frustration with our partner or our spouse or a family member, the last person who's going to hear about it is the spouse or the family member. The person at the gym, the bartender might hear about it, but not them. So there's something that we have to understand about our psychology of complaining is that we can do it much more effectively. But that also means to make selections, to really decide what are the complaints we can put aside, what's significant enough, meaningful, or nagging enough that maybe we should address it. And then there's specific ways to do that that are more effective rather than less. We're so unpracticed in complaining that when we do it very, very poorly. And then it justifies our feeling of, you see, it doesn't work to complain. But if you know how to do it correctly, and in that book, I give a lot of examples of how to do that correctly, then you can really get somewhere. And one way to do it correctly is to figure out what do you want as a result of complaining, and therefore, who do you need to talk to get it, and what do you need to say to them to get it? That working backwards is something that can be really helpful. We tend not to do it.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you. We're here with Guy Winch. Go to his website, guywinch.com. You can learn all about him and his fantastic work, including his podcast, Dear Therapist, and his most recent book, How to Fix a Broken Heart, or his past book, The Squeaky Wheel. Now, guys, something else that I wanted to touch on. You have another book, yet another book, called Emotional First Aid, and you provide strategies for all of the sort of, what's the way to call it? The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
Oh no, of daily life. That's the point.
Daily life, exactly. That's all the brushes with failure or with fear or with just the kind of unpleasant emotions that are not necessarily devastating blows, but the kind of death by a thousand cuts of being a human. So talk to us a little bit. How, if you are a person who is, a human and is experiencing this or would like to be helpful to someone else, what are the most important things we need to know about how we can apply emotional first aid to ourselves or others?
Well, the reality is that we experience emotional wounds in our adult lives, at least much more than we do physical ones. We experience failure on a regular basis. We experience rejection on a regular basis, especially with social media. Every time we post something to 1,000 followers and only 3 people like it, that's 997 rejections that we experience, even if we don't go through all of them. But it's like, oh, but I liked her stuff. Why didn't she like mine? And that's something that we experience a lot. Loss, grief, guilt. So I cover a lot of the daily experiences we have where we don't consider them emotional wounds because we don't think about it that way. But much like we know to cover a cut so it doesn't get infected or to put ice on a sprain, there are small, quick techniques that we can use, and they're all science-based, they're all based on research, that we can use to address these pains, and so they don't get infected. I'll give you one very quick example, and that's rejection. We do experience rejection as painful. It turns out we're very much hardwired to do so. In the research, it turns out that when we get rejected by people we don't like or even despise, it kind of hurts pretty much as it would if we got rejected by people we like. When people we hate at work go to lunch without us, we feel left out, even though we don't want to be with those people. So it's not reasonable. It's just hardwired in. And so the other thing that happens when we get rejected is become very self-critical. We start looking through all our lists of faults and shortcomings to understand why we might have gotten rejection. In doing so, we're kicking our self-esteem when it's already down. We should be doing the opposite. We should actually be finding ways to revive our self-esteem. And that means remind ourselves what we do bring to the table. When your colleagues go to lunch without you, whether you wanted to go with them or not, and it hurts because, again, we're wired to feel that way, not because you needed to be there that much. But what you can do is make a list of the things that make you a good colleague or a good friend. Write a quick paragraph about one of those things, qualities you know you have. That's called self-affirmation, and that will help revive your sense of self-esteem. Or reach out to somebody who accepts you and loves you to remind yourself that you belong and that you're valued. Take action to actually revive, to actually soothe, to actually build yourself up, rather than indulging the automatic response, which is to tear yourself down further.
Really good advice. Thank you so much. We're here with Guy Winch. You can learn more about him. Go to his website, guywinch.com. And we're talking about how we can deal with work stress, with burnout, and myriad other topics. I'm Dorie Clark. This is Newsweek's weekly interview show, Better, every Thursday, 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern. And as we are coming in, Guy, to our denouement, I want to ask about the pandemic. I know for myself personally, during the pandemic, during sort of the heat of it, as it were, when we were all kind of locked up and couldn't go places, I know I was getting more irritable. I was getting sort of angry and frustrated, and probably was not my best self. Now I know.
Dorie's frozen again, so she's not her best self at the moment, but I think she'll be back because she's still.
Hi.
You're back. You're back.
I'm back. Thank you. But I also think it's probably true that, for me and maybe for other people, that this experience has affected us in ways that we're not even consciously aware of, that we can't really put our fingers on, but that might be sort of lingering, in a negative way. What should we be thinking about? What should we be doing to kind of cleanse ourselves? We need a palate cleanser after the pandemic. What would you recommend?
Well, I think we need more than a palate cleanser. It was a long and difficult pandemic for many, many, many people. But the first thing I recommend is, much the same way we are used to getting regular checkups once a year, physical checkups, to just see how we're doing. Do an emotional checkup, do a psychological checkup. Actually sit and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? How am I feeling about my most important relationships? How am I feeling about myself? How's my confidence? How's my optimism? Check in with yourself. First of all, identify how you might be impacted. Is my mood different? Did I fully recover, or am I still down? Am I still quite irritable? A lot of people sustained quite a lot of stress, trauma, and losses. And if you're one of those unfortunate people, which is many, many, many millions, then there's a recovery that's involved. And again, we tend to think of psychology and emotions as something that happens by default. But in fact, our mind often takes us down the wrong path when we experience emotional distress, and we need to be intentional, and we need to disengage from autopilot. And one of the things I always say is that our mind might be the most brilliant machine in the universe. It requires adult supervision, and we have to be both the mind and the adult, and disengage from the autopilot and actually be intentional and thoughtful about what we need in given moments.
So helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in from around the world, and thank you for your patience with wonky internet today. But it has been a treat to have all of you here, and especially to talk with Guy Winch. Be sure to check him out at guywinch.com. Guy, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.